In middle school, I eagerly looked forward to my first sleepover at my friend Emma's house. The anticipation of spending the night away from home, staying up late and sharing secrets with my best friends filled me with excitement. Little did I know that this seemingly innocent night would turn into a terrifying ordeal that would forever be remembered. As the night went on, we laughed and played video games, our excitement making the time fly. The clock eventually struck 3 in the morning when an eerie silence had settled over us, an unusual stillness that heightened our senses. I brushed it off, attributing it to the late hour and the occasional rustling of the wind outside. But then a sharp sound pierced through the quiet, a distinct tapping on the front door. My heart skipped a beat and my friends and I traded worried glances. We listened intently, hoping that it was a figment of our imagination. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came again, this time more pronounced. Fear gripped us as the tapping turned into a relentless pounding on the door. It was as if somebody was determined to get in. With trembling hands, I mustered the courage to peek through the window beside the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I caught a glimpse of a figure, masked and menacing, trying to force his way into the house. Panic swept through us, and without hesitation, I rushed to Emma's parents' room. My voice quivered as I shook her mom awake, desperately trying to convey the urgency of the situation. "Somebody's trying to break in." Her parents sprang into action, alerting the police while keeping us safe in the back of the house. Huddled together, we listened as the intruder's attempts to break in grew more frantic. Our hearts pounded in unison and tears welled in our eyes. Time felt like an eternity as we waited for the arrival of the police. The darkness outside seemed to conceal endless possibilities, and we clung to each other. Finally, we could hear the police cars through the silence, and a wave of relief had washed over us. The sound of the intruder's knocking and footsteps could be heard as he fled into the night, scared off by the approaching authorities. As the police arrived and thoroughly searched the area, they offered words of reassurance and comfort, their presence bringing a sense of security to our shaken hearts. They assured us that they would remain vigilant throughout the night to ensure that we would be safe. As the morning light slowly broke through the darkness, a sense of normalcy had returned to Emma's house. The police concluded their investigation and finally left, and we were assured that measures would be taken to keep us safe. Since that night, I haven't had another sleepover. I don't know if it was more my parents being too scared by everything, but I will never forget what happened. A 30-year-old female, was shopping at a grocery store. I was in the drink aisle reaching for something when I suddenly got a bad feeling. I turned my head to look back and jumped when a man who was extremely close to me, like an inch behind me, quickly moved past me. My knee-jerk reaction was to reach for my back pocket to make sure that my car keys were still there, and it was. And so I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was someone in a hurry, who perhaps almost ran into me absent-mindedly. As I finished grabbing my drinks, I glanced at him. He stopped a few feet from me, hands behind his back, casually walking back and forth looking at drinks. He did not have a cart or basket, but maybe he was just grabbing some drinks and didn't need one. I moved on to another aisle, and after I reached to grab something and turned around, there he is again. Except this time a few feet from me, again hands behind his back, looking at items in the aisle. Spooked at this point, I went to check out. As I'm in line, I look behind me and I don't see him. Good, I'm in the clear. I turn my head back around and bam, there he is on my left, looking at something near the checkout line. There are several different checkout lines as well as a self-checkout, so the odds of him being there coincidentally seemed low. He still did not have a cart or any items. Not knowing what else to do, I just stare directly at him until he notices me. He immediately walks off and I don't see him again. Considering how close he got, I think he was trying to steal from me. I was probably seen as an easy target because I was alone with a purse. Either that or I just stared down some innocent poor soul. I've never only started thinking about this in the last 10 to 15 years, but I think I narrowly escaped being murdered as a kid. When I was a teen growing up in rural Texas, a family from Las Vegas moved in next to us. It was Harry, that's his real name, and his wife, her mother, 2 daughters, and one of their husbands. I was drawn to them because they were very friendly and interesting, all except for Harry. It didn't take long to figure out that everybody in the family hated him. He gave off a real dirtbag vibe. The family had money, but it came from his wife's side of the family. He didn't really fit in with the rest of them. Over a year or so, I spent more and more time over there, but avoided Harry like the plague. Talking to his stepdaughters, I learned that their mother was getting ready to divorce him. I think you could see the writing on the wall too. One day, out of the blue, he stopped over at my house. I was outside riding my bike or something. He asked me if I wanted to take a ride with him to check on their cattle. For some stupid reason, I forgot all of my misgivings about him. I thought that it might be cool to take a ride with him out in the country to go and check on the livestock. My mother was inside talking to a friend on the phone. I'll never forget how she reacted when I asked her if I could go with them. Without interrupting her conversation, she mouthed, "No," and shook her head to reiterate the point. She told me to just go to the front door and shake my head, rather than going outside and telling him that I wasn't going. Harry just shrugged and laughed. After his wife finally kicked him out, Harry started harassing them in weird ways, creeping outside their house at night, and even calling in fake obituaries for one of the daughters into the local newspaper. Thankfully, he took off back to Vegas soon after. After I had kids of my own, I started thinking about that incident and what could have happened to me that day. If my mother hadn't had the foresight to tell me that I couldn't go, I think Harry would have hurt me just to get back at his family, who had a fondness for me. It's chilling to think about. About a year ago, I spent a decent amount of time working in a different city than I currently live in. One day was very cold and the Airbnb that I had booked was pretty far away. I didn't have a car and had failed to pack a warm coat. I ducked into the Kmart nearby to buy something that I could wear on my walk, with the intention of returning it the following morning. My best option was this enormous XXL fuzzy bathrobe. My walk home led me through this beautiful botanic garden along a waterway. It was nearing midnight and I was halfway through my journey. I'm usually quite aware when I'm out, especially at night, but I had let my guard down a bit, due in part to the enormous bathrobe that I had wrapped around me. It was like wearing a fuzzy suit of armor. Suddenly, I felt intensely uncomfortable. I couldn't quite put my finger on what I had heard, but my immediate thought was a couple of males holding a whispered conversation. I rounded a corner and ducked into some trees, sucking my breath in and straining to understand what I was hearing. Light footsteps, voices. 2 men neared my hiding spot on the path, and I internally berated myself for not being more careful. Nobody was out, so screaming would do nothing. I'm a very small female, so this situation was one of my worst nightmares. As they passed, I heard, "She's around here somewhere." I felt physically sick, until one of the guys let out a low whistle, and I heard the jingle of a collar, a dog scurrying past my spot, and a good girl followed by smoochy noises. An intense sense of relief followed. They were talking about their beloved dog, not hunting me. They seemed harmless, endearing even. I readjusted my bathrobe to cover my head. It was that cold out, and I popped out from the trees. I didn't realize until later that I looked at myself in the mirror that the bathrobe arms were now on top of my head, sticking out like some grotesque, bulbous monster appendages. I also didn't realize that the men had stopped, or were walking very slowly, only a few meters ahead on the path. One of the men screamed in terror when they saw my emergence from the trees. The others swore loudly, and they both took off running across the bridge over the waterway, followed closely by their dog, who was now barking frantically. I still have the picture that I took of myself in the mirror after the incident, and I get the giggles every time I see it. I must admit, it was a rush to finally be on the other end of a situation like this. A couple of years ago, I flew home to visit family. I would be there for about a week, and then we would head to the coast for a week, and then back home for another week. I totally needed this break. I had just ended an on-again, off-again relationship. Like seriously, one day on and the next off. It took 7 months of putting up with it because you're supposed to fight for what is important to you, right? Anyhow, I finally just said that it was done. No more chances, no trying to work it out, just done. So with that chapter of my life being over, I was more than happy to be somewhere else, surrounded by family, and begin putting myself back together. Got there, spent a couple of days sleeping a lot. My mother's a nurse, and she was becoming concerned that there was something physically wrong with me. I just needed a couple days in a safe place, where I could let my brain work on digesting the new life I would have when I got back home. So, before we left for the coast, I met up with a friend from grade school that I had kept in contact with over the years. I thought it would just be he and I, but it didn't really faze me that another person was there. We hung out for a while, and then I needed to head home because I had to take a backwoods route to get home, or take a different route that would add another 20 miles onto my track. Being backwoods, I needed to be able to keep an eye out for deer. So I said goodbye and told my friend's friend that if he was ever in my neck of the woods, look me up and we would grab a drink and hang out. I told him to grab my number from my friend, and out the door that I went. About halfway home, I got this weird, queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. So I slowed way down, and sure enough, there is a deer in the middle of the road. Because I had slowed down, I could see another car out on the road. I couldn't shake the queasy feeling, so I figured it would be better to cut off and go down the main road, because there were more places to stop. I seriously didn't want to stop in some rural farmer's driveway. I've watched too many movies to make that mistake. So I get over to the main road and pull into a gas station, and I sit there for a couple of minutes, trying not to get sick to my stomach. I ran into the store, grabbed some water and ginger ale, and came back out to my vehicle, still unable to shake that queasy feeling. So I started to head home from the gas station and knew I didn't want to go straight home. So I drove around, taking this road or that road, until that weird feeling started to go away. And then I went home, read for a bit, and then went to sleep. Next day, everything was fine and we headed off to the coast. Fast forward 2 weeks. The trip is over and I'm still feeling a little bit fragile over the breakup, but that's all. I figured I would begin the process of cleansing the environment of negative energies, and then work through the baggage that came from the breakup. I knew there was a lot and that it would take time. So the next day, I'm going about my business and everything as cool as can be, when picking through the junk left behind after a breakup. I'm really just doing mindless things to zone out and not to have to think too much on the activity, since my brain was working full-time already. A little bit later in the day, my phone rings. I don't get a lot of calls, so I assumed that there might be a family emergency, and that I needed to answer it ASAP. The area code of the caller, who is not in my contacts, is the same as my cousin, so I answered without a second thought. On the other end was my friend's friend, S.A., the acquaintance that I met at my friend's house. It's a little weird to have him be calling me, but I'm not thinking that anything is terribly out of the ordinary. I asked him what was up and he said that he was at the airport. I still find it a little odd but say, "Oh, that's cool. Where are you going?" He said that he had already landed. Again, I'm distracted and really just want to get him off the phone so I could go back to my mental sidestep and zone out while my brain chugged away. So I said that I hoped that he had a good time wherever he was. He said that he needed me to pick him up. "What? Did you say you needed me to pick you up?" "Yeah," he replied. "I came to visit you." I paused there for a second. I know for a fact that I didn't show any more interest in him than general courtesy. Even the tossed over-the-shoulder look-me-up comment was one of those polite things to say because you never actually plan on seeing them again. "Why did you come to visit me?" I asked. He said that he felt a deep connection and wanted to be with me. I'm starting to get angry as well as freaked out at this stage. I told him that I didn't feel the connection at all, and couldn't believe that he would fly across country to see someone that he had spent maybe 2 hours with. He said that I had invited him when I said to look him up. I said, "No, I don't think so. That's just a polite thing to say to some random person that has made a very small impression on me." He said that he needed to find a way back home then since I had misled him. Misled him? What the heck? Look me up if you're ever in my neck of the woods had led him to think that was the basis for any sort of encounter that was meaningful. He said that he needed a place to stay until he could get the money for a plane ticket back. I said that there were more than enough hotels that he could stay at while he got himself sorted out. He said that he didn't have any money after buying the random one-way plane ticket. So at this stage, I'm flabbergasted angry and freaked out that someone would do that on a one-way ticket. I finally caved and said that he could stay the night while he sorted everything out, but I expected him to be gone no later than the morning of the day after tomorrow. So I bring him to my place, throw pillows and a blanket on the couch and turn to head to my bedroom, and he asks if he can sleep with me. I'm like, no way that's going to happen. So I point out that I have firearms and do not attempt to come in. The next day, I have to work, so I woke him up and told him to get up and find a way home immediately. I also told him that I had to work, but I would check in on his progress because the next morning, I was dropping him off at the airport regardless of whether or not he had a way back. I went to work and he blew up my phone all day. Wanted me to come back to my place for lunch. Told him that I couldn't and that I was way too busy. I finally got home from work and I'm chuckling at a text that I got about my dog. And that's when I noticed that he had rearranged everything. And by everything, I mean every room of the house had been rearranged. I flipped my lid. I asked him why he thought it was normal to do anything that he did. Instead of answering, he asked me who I had been talking to. I said that it really wasn't any of his business, but I had received a text from the guy watching my dog while I was on vacation. Color me shocked when he says that he doesn't want me to talk to that guy. I'm no longer freaked, but full force apocalyptic disaster is about to be unleashed and leave nothing but a smoking crater. The temperature drops about 10 degrees and I very calmly said to get his stuff and I was calling a cab to take him to the airport because he's a complete psycho. Side note, full rage had been achieved when it feels like the temperature drops and I speak very calmly. If I'm complaining about something, it's a quick burn. If I go monotone calm and tilt my head to one side slightly, that's where I hit Arctic level anger. So, he unaware of the environmental change that has occurred, and that the chances of survival are dropping by the second, decides to tell me that he used my computer, and got my ex's phone number and they both agree that I was just heartless. We're fast approaching the epic scale disaster, and he finally seems to notice how deep into rage I had sunk. I told him it was unlikely that he had gotten into my computer, because it's a full quote of a part of The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and that he would have had to have been the processing power of the Hadron Collider computers, and it was obvious that that was not the case. I told him that he had 3 minutes to get his stuff and get out, or I wouldn't be responsible for what would occur. So, still yelling insults at me, he gathered his stuff up and he left. I used to get calls and texts from him. I would block one and 6 more would pop up, but it eventually stopped. To this day, I have no idea, nor interest in knowing where he's at or if he made it back.